This fighter is merciless.
In this UFC battle.
Petr Yan managed to make legends like Jose. At this point, it's hard to not notice the kind of devastation this guy leaves behind, whether it's good or bad.
On the head here to him. That's illegal. His knee was down. His knee was all.
This fighter has earned his nickname No Mercy for a reason. All he's looking to do is to destroy, and it doesn't seem to matter how he does it as long as you crumble. And if this wasn't surprising enough, the craft behind his madness will surprise you the most. With this fight coming up, I decided to take time to look at what exactly makes Petr Yan such an effective and brutal fighter. I studied his most recent fights in great detail so you don't have to, in order to get an updated sense of his fighting style and the really fascinating technical habits about him. If you're looking for a study on anti-wrestling striking, or a pressure approach with a very good guard, I think this is going to be a perfect video for you. You're going to want to stay towards the end because I'm going to reveal to you how Petr Yan's style can clash with Cory Sandhagen's habits. When it comes down to how their habits clash, it's a really interesting revelation that I came across after studying so much of their fights, and it's going to be worth your time if you want to know more. So let's get right into this. So you're probably wondering, how does Petr Yan's style work? I had to study his last 4 fights to get a sense of how his approach works. Generally, when I study a fighter, I start to notice that they tend to have specific strategies that they work to apply to most of their opponents. For example, with Israel Adesanya, he likes to use a certain feinting style to establish his offense first. Like he'll use his hip feint after establishing the threat of a kick. Or you have TJ Dillashaw, who likes to attack by creating angles and then attacking from those new angles. For Yan, it took me a while to notice that his attack style seemed to vary quite a bit across many of his opponents, and this is because his approach to attacking an opponent really depends on what the opponent gives him. He's a pretty patient fighter who relies on punishing what the opponent feeds him. Now, if they were to hand fight, Yan has his own arsenal of hand fighting tactics to reach those reactions. Like when Jose Aldo would fight with him, Yan would use tactics like controlling the lead hand and then reaching through with his jab. I've gone over this tactic many times on this channel, but in short, by controlling that lead hand, you control one of their weapons and you put that hand in check so that you could advance with one less threat to worry about. Now if the opponent were to move away, he's got his own set of tactics to close the distance on the evasive fighter as well. When Aldo would evade, one of the tactics Yan would use was a hop step jab to close that gap to get into range, then firing his cross. Or if the opponent is looking to work his guard, he has his own appropriate responses to counter as well. Or maybe the opponent is looking to use striking to set up takedowns. Surprisingly, Yan has his own set of answers for that too, and I'll reveal those details and how he handles it soon enough here. The heart of Yan's game revolves really around his guard, and this is why you typically see him rely on his double forearm guard. Yan likes to evade when it's appropriate, but he's much more likely to rely on his shelling guard most of the time. There's some pros and cons to relying on the shelling guard, and Yan is a perfect example of a fighter who can highlight many of the good reasons why you would want to use the guard and how to be effective at using it. Yan's guard work is probably some of the best work that I've seen, and I'll explain why. A tight guard that covers all bases is a great defense because it's a universal defense. It's a guard that's capable of protecting you in nearly all ways that you can get attacked. A specific defense is something like a parry. A parry is good if you're anticipating a straight shot, but what if a straight shot doesn't come? What if the opponent tricks you into thinking that a straight shot comes, but instead you're left vulnerable when you throw a hook instead? Like here, the opponent's going to anticipate a straight shot, but they're left open and take a hook instead. However, with a universal guard, if you misread the shot selection, it's generally fine because you have majority of your openings already covered. The shell tends to be the go-to defense when you're unsure what kind of attack is coming. Having a universal defense that can protect you against all kinds of threats can be a big advantage. This also complements Yan's pressure-oriented tendencies too. If you're going to press forward like Yan likes to do, you really have to have your guard on point, and this is what makes Yan special. His hands are always glued to his chin every time he presses forward. This allows him to shell up at a moment's notice. Yan's guard is exceptionally good. His guard is very tight and it's consistently tight as well. Typically when you see someone guard, they do tend to guard, but it's a partial guard like this for example. There you'll notice that the head is guarded but part of the body is still exposed. Yan's guard is good because he's able to cover as many openings as possible when he shells up, and the way that he does this is by collapsing his posture. So pay attention to this circle. What Yan likes to do is posture forward in order to lower that circle. You'll notice that the circle offers more protection by simply collapsing the posture. This allows Yan to cover the body as well as the head. This tends to be his guard style, whereas many fighters, they'll just use their guard and then adjust their guard as different shots kind of come. Yan on the other hand tends to block everything all at once. Also, when he lowers his posture like this, he tends to keep his hands lower and it makes it more accessible for him to go for underhooks in case he needs to lift the opponent to defend takedown. When it comes to relying on the guard, it has its disadvantages. You're susceptible to getting hit and the opponent could work their offense and move ahead on the scorecards. Also, it's very possible that opponents could find gaps in the guard openings as well. For Yan specifically, because he tends to lower his posture in order to close the gaps in his guard, it makes him vulnerable to getting clinched into knees as well. This is something I observed across many of his fights. Opponents tend to see his lowered posture when he shells up like that, and they're likely to go for a clinch to keep him locked into that position in order to land knees. This isn't to say there's no merit in blocking. By blocking, you tend to always be in range to land your shots and to counter back. Most of the time that Yan blocks, he defends shots on his own terms, knowing that a firefight is about to ensue. He'll eventually use this to his advantage. When you use your guard and you put your guard up, it tells the opponent that you're going to enter a defensive state. This can actually draw the opponent to come to attack you. You could use this against them by purposely pretending you're going to enter defense, but quickly change your rhythm into an attack as they come forward. For example, watch these instances. You're going to see that Yan will put his guard up for a split second, then he'll quickly burst to land something like a cross or a combo. Now, the shots that tend to hurt you the most tend to be the ones that you don't really see coming. When Yan conveys that he's entering defense, it kind of diminishes the opponent's defensive senses because they're either relaxed or they're moving forward into Yan's power because they're likely to feel like Yan isn't really attacking them. Yan had some really impressive knockdowns, specifically from slamming that cross. I looked to see what kind of setup or rhythm was taking place because many fighters have actually fallen victim to such a simple punch. Then I realized what was actually going on and why he was landing this so viciously. It was the rhythm of his guard play that allowed him to find those shots. Nate Diaz likes to use the same tactic as well. As an avid user as a guard, you typically see him use his guard, then go instantly into some kind of attack to throw off the opponent's rhythm. Even when the opponent is working his guard, he's got a good sense of timing of when to throw his signature counter, the slipping lead hook. And this typically tends to be one of his signature counters right from the guard, allows him to avoid dangers while simultaneously slipping away with that lead hook. And then from this guarding position, he's going to take his head off that center line and throw the lead hook moving away from that danger angle right there. Because of Yan's defensive habit of arcing over the shell, it easily invites opponents to work his body. But this counter is actually a really nice way to punish opponents looking to work the body, like when he punished Aldo with a lead hook when he went for a body shot. Yan's takedown defense is actually really sound. He's got very quick responsive hips to sprawl whenever the opponent tries to go for takedowns. Believe it or not, a lot of his takedown defense stems from both his defensive and offensive habits. Now, the way he reacts and how he responds when attacking or defending will actually set up a very strong foundation for him to handle the wrestling and the grappling exchanges. In order to make this clear, let me give you an example. So when you throw a strike, you have a lot of options of how you want to exit or end your strike. You could choose to weave out and step away. Or perhaps you could even choose to pull away instead. Or maybe you could just simply choose to block. When it comes to an attack, one of Yan's most common habits is to exit into a low level. So when he goes for a power strike, he'll typically like to commit forward. Sometimes it does look like he's falling over, but he's actually committing to a low angle to the side of the opponent. Now this allows him to stay lower than his opponent. In wrestling, you tend to have the leverage when you're lower than the opponent, since your center of gravity and positioning gives you the better leverage to handle takedowns better. When Yan lobs a shot, his posture is low and he almost always handles the grappling exchanges well, with grace. The low position allows him to go right for the underhooks to lift the opponent from moving down for the takedown attempts. It's interesting to see how he sets himself up for success against takedowns even before they happen by attacking in this fashion. Yan's defensive habits actually follow the similar foundation as well. His defensive habits not only make him such a fiend to deal with against wrestling, but also sets him up to punish the opponents hard if they attempt to wrestle him. Yan likes to slip off to avoid punches, and he'll often do this by slipping off while leaving his lead arm low. And by leaving that lead arm low, it actually allows him to immediately fight for the underhooks or to catch the head. Now this lets him lift the opponent's head back up if they attempt to kind of do a level change on him. He often sheds off the opponent with something like an arm drag to peel the arms off, sometimes delivering a shot in the process. From what I studied, Yan actually does a really good job of mitigating the takedown attempts. Many of his opponents have tried mixing in their strikes to set up the wrestling, but I found that Yan's defensive habit would always keep him one step ahead to prevent the takedowns. In fact, Yan was actually able to punish Sterling when he tried to level change on him multiple times. He would do a lot of things like throwing out his strikes so that he could set up his takedowns, but when Sterling would move to throw his shots and to go into a level change, Yan would actually slip off and keep his arm low to strap the chin. And then he would lift Sterling's head up, and what this would do is allow him to set up something like an Osotogari-like throw, and he did this multiple times, sweeping the legs and shoving the head in the process. This tends to be one of his signature throws that he does try to go for pretty often. There is a vulnerability that I've been able to identify from Yan's defensive habits. Because he likes to slip his head off to the side, it can be very easy to punish his habit in a variety of different ways. Your body is still stationary and prone to attack, and that's one of the examples. Even when Yan would slip against Jimmy Rivera, Rivera would actually still score to the body, and he did this a few times while Yan was trying to slip off. Another notable vulnerability was when Yan slipped off and Sterling was able to catch the head. Yan does tend to keep his head exposed when he does go for the slip, so the flying knee was actually really good response. If you've been watching Yan for a while, you're pretty familiar with the fact that he loves tossing and sweeping the opponents to the ground, like his signature scissor sweep after taking the back. The fact that he likes to sweep the opponent also makes him very dangerous because he's an opponent that you have to be careful about throwing kicks towards. Sterling found a lot of success fighting from range because he was using a lot of kicks to set up his punches. Since Yan likes to cover up and work from his guard position, Sterling would do a lot of kicking feints to set up his punches. The reason why kicking feints can work is because you could draw out reactions from Yan like his parry or other opportunities. So you could use a kick feint to deliver the punches, and this is why you saw Sterling throwing a lot of feinting into punches, because it was pretty useful. However, kicks can be a downfall too. If you throw lazy kicks at Yan, he will catch the legs and he will sweep you. Even if the kicks aren't lazy, he still has a good ability to catch the legs in order to punish kicking attempts. Okay, so now that we have the gist of Petr Yan's craft out of the way, it's gonna make things a little bit more clear moving forward. So you want to know exactly how does his style match up against Cory Sandhagen's style. If you're not quite familiar with Cory Sandhagen's craft, I will leave a link in the description. It pretty much covers his habits, his signature moves, and how he sets up his tactics, but I will explain the main points in this video. Based on the previous analysis I did on Cory Sandhagen, one of his signature moves is what he describes as the feeler jab. Cory doesn't overcommit on his punches at all. In fact, his setups, a lot of them are done from probing with the jab in order to create openings. And to make matters worse, he actually does this at the very end of his reach, making it that much harder for opponents to counter him. This may work in his favor against Yan because Yan typically does rely on his guard, and there's a very fair possibility that Cory could turn Yan's guard into his playground. Moreover, since Cory does fight long range, it's very hard to land counters on him. TJ Dillashaw had a very difficult time trying to land his lead hook counter, for example, when Cory would try to probe out that jab. The question coming into this fight is if Yan can actually manage to land his counters off his own guard work. Will he be able to make the adjustments in order to land his signature lead hook counter when TJ Dillashaw had troubles landing his lead hook? We do know that Cory liked to set up his shovel hook to the body as well. It worked well against TJ's habit of slipping since the body's still there to get hit, and we saw that Cory was able to hit the body even if TJ tried to move the head. Alternatively, this could also work in Yan's favor too, because he does use his lead hook to counter things like body shots, just like how he showed against Aldo when Aldo tried going for his body. Moving forward, the other signature move of Cory Sandhagen is to set up the flying knee. From what Cory mentions, he likes to set this up as the opponent is actually moving forward. So Yan's pressure-oriented tendencies might work in Cory's favor if he wants to set up the flying knee. Tactically speaking, Cory has the right tools necessary to set up the knee in other ways as well. We did see this earlier in the video where I pointed out how Sterling was able to exploit Yan's habit of slipping his head off low. Now if Cory is able to identify this habit, it's well within his skill set to use the fielder jab in order to set up the flying knee. This is one possible thing that can happen, so do keep this in mind. Do keep in mind that Yan does like relying on his guard more than usual, but his sense of rhythm is very dangerous from the guard, even against opponents taller than him. We've seen him drop even evasive fighters or even longer fighters using his deceptive guard work that I explained earlier in this breakdown. Since Cory does stylistically like using kicks, this could be a good and bad thing. The fact that Yan likes to block also means that there's a very strong possibility that Cory could chip away at his guard using spinning kicks or just heavy attacks in general. Conversely, this also could backfire on him because Yan is very good at punishing kicks as well. If those kicks are caught, you could almost expect that there's going to be a strong likelihood that Yan could sweep Cory, and this would play into Yan's skill set. One thing I'm personally amused by is that I really wonder how exactly Yan will deal with Cory's habit of stance switching. He did this often against TJ and he did find success making himself a harder target to hit. So how will Yan be able to handle something like this? Who knows how this fight will go? The fight could possibly end in seconds, in some kind of flash knockout, and we won't get to see these observations play out. Or we might get a full fight. We might get to see new things that we didn't anticipate too. Both fighters have never really been knocked out before in their entire career, so this might suggest that this fight could play into a decision. I guess time will have to tell. After showing you what I discovered analyzing this fight, go ahead and comment down below who you think will win, or if I change your mind about your perspective of this matchup. I recently opened up a new website, and for those of you who have been really immersed in my work that I've been producing, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to my email newsletter. I want to make sure that you're able to access my work in case I'm no longer on YouTube or any other reason. I'm currently working on some content that you'll receive for being a subscriber to my newsletter at the moment. I do have plans for short videos too, like cool signature moves of Petr Yan that I didn't get a chance to share in this video, but I will make it exclusive onto my website. And you'll also be able to get notified by it through the email newsletter as well, so do keep that in mind. I really do appreciate all the encouragement that a lot of you give me, and I want to make sure that I can maintain this kind of relationship with you in the long run outside of YouTube. And subscribing to my newsletter will really help with that. Alright, thanks for watching everybody.